The rain didn't wash the streets of this city clean, it just made the grime slicker. I stood over the body of Olivia Turner, watching the water mix with the blood pooling around her head like a dark halo. The cops were calling it a suicide, a tragic leap from the balcony of the 4th floor. But bodies don't land like that. They don't land with their hands clasped perfectly over their chest, and they certainly don't land on a pile of scattered manuscript pages that were dry despite the downpour. The scent of ozone and wet asphalt was heavy, but underneath it, I could smell the distinct metallic tang of a setup. The uniform on the beat, Officer Miller, looked at me with that tired glaze they all have. He wanted to close the book, go home, and forget. I was there to make sure the book stayed open until the ink ran dry. This is Case 009, the final chapter. The author of this mess? Yours truly, Detective Liam Bennett. The date was November 14th, 11:30 p.m. The address was a crumbling Art Deco apartment complex on the corner of 5th and Vine. The problem started 3 hours earlier, in my office, where the air conditioner rattles like a dying man's chest and the rent is always overdue. That's when Scarlett Turner walked in. She didn't knock. She just drifted in like a ghost looking for a haunt. She was the kind of woman who wore trouble like a mink coat, expensive, heavy, and likely to suffocate you. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. She placed a stack of crisp bills on my scarred mahogany desk. "My sister didn't kill herself," she said, her voice trembling with a rage she was trying to suppress. "She was being written into a corner, Mr. Bennett." And she ran out of pages. She smelled of lavender and fear. She told me about Olivia's new lover, a writer named Theodore Wright, a man obsessed with the tragedy of the human condition. I looked at the money. It was enough to keep the wolves away for a month. "My door doesn't open for virtue, Miss Turner," I told her, pouring 2 fingers of cheap scotch. "It opens for desperation and the cash that covers the overhead. You've got both." Back at the scene, I crouched down next to Olivia. The police photographer was flashing bulbs, blinding us to the subtleties. I saw what they missed. The ink on her fingers wasn't from a pen. It was printer toner. And those pages she landed on? They weren't random. They were the ending of a story titled "The Girl Who Fell." The date on the footer was tomorrow. Someone had scripted this death, and they had directed the scene with lethal precision. I don't work for the law. I work for the truth. And the truth is usually ugly, hiding under the floorboards where the roaches scatter. The police see a body and a note. I see a narrative forced onto a victim who refused to play her part. What you are about to hear is the uncut version, the raw footage of a city that eats its own young. Listen closely to the shadows. That's where I operate. I sat in my office, staring at the bottom of a brown glass bottle. The amber liquid swirled, distorting the room, much like Theodore Wright tried to distort reality. Scarlett's story had holes, sure. Clients always lie. They lie to protect the memory of the dead, or they lie to protect themselves. But the physical evidence I'd scraped off the pavement didn't lie. The police report was a work of fiction, a lazy narrative drafted by men who wanted to sleep. I needed more than coffee to wash the taste of that crime scene out of my mouth. I needed to understand the mind of a man who thought he could play God with a typewriter. The clues were hard-boiled, gritty little things that didn't fit the suicide picture. First, there was the bruising on Olivia's wrists. Faint, yellowish, days old. Restraints. Not the kind for fun, but the kind used to keep someone in a chair, listening. Then there was the correspondence I found in her apartment. Letters from Theodore, not of love, but of critique. He criticized her life choices, her sadness, molding her depression like clay. And finally, the clincher, a rejection letter from a publisher found in Theodore's trash, stating his characters lacked authentic tragedy. I went to see Theodore Wright. He lived in a loft that smelled of old paper and pretentious arrogance. He was a man who looked at people and saw paragraphs. "Detective Bennett," he smirked, holding a glass of wine like a scepter. "To what do I owe the pleasure of this interruption? I'm in the middle of a breakthrough." "Your breakthrough looks a lot like a breakdown," I said, leaning against his doorframe. "Olivia Turner. You didn't just write about her, did you?" You directed her. The conversation was a dance on a razor's edge. He spoke of art imitating life, of the necessity of suffering for great literature. He didn't confess, not in words, but he confessed in his eyes. He saw Olivia as a prop, a plot device. I realized then that the violence here wasn't a gun or a knife. It was psychological warfare. He had systematically dismantled Olivia's sanity, isolating her, feeding her despair, pushing her toward the ledge just to see if she would fall exactly how he described it in chapter 12. The psychology of this crime was rooted in a narcissism so deep it drowned out any humanity. Theodore wasn't writing a book. He was plagiarizing reality because he lacked the soul to create anything real. He needed a tragic ending to sell copies, so he manufactured one. He was a vampire, sucking the life out of Olivia to put ink on a page. I realized the suicide note the cops found was actually a dictation. He had made her write her own obituary. Unmasking him wasn't about finding a smoking gun. It was about finding the draft. I broke into his study while he was out preening for his literary agent. Hidden in a false bottom of his desk was the manuscript for The Girl Who Fell. It contained details of the fall, the specific angle, the way the dress would tear, written 3 weeks before Olivia died. He hadn't predicted the future, he had enforced it. You chase the truth in this town, and you find it's usually rot. It doesn't set you free, it just weighs you down. Finding the manuscript didn't bring Olivia back. It just meant I knew exactly how cold the world could be. You find the truth, but she's never pretty. She leaves you poorer, drunker, and looking over your shoulder. The case closed with the snap of handcuffs, a sound distinct enough to cut through the city noise. I handed the manuscript to Officer Miller. He didn't want to believe it at first, that a celebrated intellectual like Theodore Wright could be a butcher of souls, but the timeline was undeniable. The pages described bruises Olivia hadn't received until the night she died. Theodore didn't scream when they took him away. He just looked at me with cold, dead eyes and said, "It would have been a bestseller." Scarlett Turner didn't cry when I told her. She just nodded, lighting a cigarette with a hand that finally stopped shaking. "He wanted an ending," she whispered. "Now he has one." Technically, this wasn't murder in the first degree by the state's archaic definition. It was coerced suicide, psychological manslaughter. The modus operandi was gaslighting weaponized to a lethal degree. It reminded me of the old pulp stories where the villain uses hypnosis. Only here, the hypnosis was emotional abuse. Theodore preyed on human frailty, the need to be understood, and twisted it until the victim felt their only narrative arc was death. It was a crime of supreme ego. He wanted to be the puppet master, proving that he could control destiny. The legacy of this case? A check that cleared, paying for my bourbon and the electric bill for another month. Theodore's book was never published, locked away in an evidence locker. Olivia is still dead. The city didn't change. The rain still falls, washing nothing away. We stopped one monster, but the machinery that created him, the hunger for sensational tragedy, is still grinding away out there. Telling you this story, it's like striking a match in a flooded basement. It flares up, ugly and bright, showing you the rats in the corner, and then it fizzles out. The darkness rushes back in, heavier than before. I need that silence now. I need to forget the look on Theodore's face, the look of a man who thought he was the hero of his own twisted novel. There's a new envelope under the door. I saw it slide in when the shadow passed the frosted glass. Maybe it's a jealous husband, maybe it's a missing kid, or maybe it's just another bill. Either way, the phone is going to ring. It always does. So, listen to me. If you want this office to stay open, if you want me to keep wading through the sewers so you don't have to, you need to keep the channel alive. Subscribe, share this tape. The night is young and the bourbon is running low. I need to keep the lights on. That's enough talk. Kill the lights. Close the door on your way out. I have a glass to fill and a ghost to drink with.